What do Stoics do when others behave badly? This is a great question to ask, and it does need an answer. It comes up a lot in Stoic forums, in groups, in workshops, in random questions that get posted on videos. And it sometimes comes in a very generic formulation, like the one that I just gave you, and sometimes it's with a great amount of precision and specificity as the person gives details about the bad or wrong actions of other people that either they are observing or they are themselves being affected by. And it's a great question in part because what it reveals is a mistaken understanding that sometimes arises about Stoicism. An understanding that isn't completely wrong, but which takes a Stoic idea and then blows it up into all of Stoicism, and that is of the sort of interior withdrawal, going into yourself against a hostile world of both events and other people that you feel could be detrimental to you. And it's aided by little quips from whether Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or Epictetus, for example, saying you're not being insulted unless you choose to view yourself as being insulted. Nobody can really harm you. The whole notion of the interior citadel. And while there's some truth to that, that's not the totality of Stoicism. What is the genuine Stoic approach to seeing bad or wrong or irrational actions being done by other people? There's really three main parts to it, you could say, two or three, depending on how things are being directed, because it could be directed at the environment or animals, people you don't know, the world in general, the bad actions. It could be directed towards beings that you feel some sort of identification or concern or care for. Remember that Stoicism holds that we are social, communal animals, and that's part of our rationality, and that it is quite natural that we take care of others who are not ourselves, or it could be directed at us. And so in the case of the second and third, we would have three parts to this. So what are the general parts of a Stoic approach to seeing bad behavior on the part of other people? One part is classifying the action as a bad one. That takes some doing. We also would say that there's a lot of ways to formulate this. Epictetus says you can tell yourself the action seems right or good to that person who's doing the wrong thing, and we could say good, right, or reasonable. These are all closely connected. And then we can also say that the third part is realizing that it doesn't have to affect you negatively unless you choose to allow it to do so, and that has to do with your own responses and mindset. So let's look at the first one first, right? Being Stoic does not mean avoiding judgments or not being even judgmental. It means making judgments rightly about moral matters, which extend not just to good or bad, right or wrong, but also to reasonable and unreasonable. Prudence is very important. So saying to somebody, man, that's really stupid what you're doing, that's a judgment. And it could, in fact, be a proper judgment, right? If the action is indeed a stupidly set up one or stupidly motivated one. Stoicism does not mean saying that nothing outside of the core of yourself has value. And you can think about the different criteria that Stoics typically appeal to, the cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and the corresponding vices provides moral criteria to say that something is good or bad, right? And a person has virtues or vices or behaves virtuously or viciously. Whether their actions, whether their mindset is in accordance with nature, understood in its full sense to include a properly developed human nature, or whether they're out of accord or against nature. That's another main criteria. Another absolutely central criteria. The notion of it can be translated duty or appropriate actions. This is really central to Stoicism as well. And to be a Stoic doesn't mean to stop using those criteria or to only apply them to yourself. And, the Stoics will say that being bad or doing bad actions, behaving badly, is bad for the person who does them, but that doesn't mean that it's not bad for other people. If you're bullying somebody because you are insecure and you need a target, that person that you're bullying is being negatively affected by it, even if it's just in terms of, losing money or social status. They're probably not a Stoic, and you're probably harming them psychologically, right? And perhaps creating more bullies as a result. And a Stoic should have no problem actually saying that that's the case. In the second part, saying that the person who's behaving badly is doing so because that course of action appears to be right or reasonable or good to them. One of the things that we want to think about are our emotional reactions and the thoughts that they stem from. So Epictetus is a great example in this, as is Seneca, who's got an entire work on this emotion. Anger is a very common response to seeing people behaving badly. And it's not a good thing from a Stoic perspective. It stems from our own insecurity, our own mistaken conceptions of things. And so, we want to avoid anger and other excessive emotions. Epictetus actually does talk about an emotion that in Greek is eleos, which is often translated as pity. We could also translate it with a word that we like more these days because pity has a pejorative connotation, compassion, right? You can feel compassion towards this poor bastard who is so screwed up in their, thoughts and emotional structures and habits and assumptions that they get basic things wrong in the sphere of morality and action and think that they're doing the right thing when they're doing the wrong thing, right? And sometimes these rights and wrongs can have several different levels. And there's nothing that says, as a Stoic, you can't try to persuade somebody that their course of action is wrong. You can even try to compel them to do the right thing. That's probably going to be unsuccessful. You can inform them, you can exhort them, you can do all sorts of things. And you can also shield people who are going to be negatively affected. There's nothing in Stoicism that says that you shouldn't do that. And actually, there's good reason to think that you ought to do those sorts of things when you're seeing somebody on the loose with a whole bunch of wrong-headed ideas in their head leading to bad behavior. Coming to the last thing, so when it's affecting you or somebody that you're close to, that you identify with, that you care about, you have a choice about how you allow these things to affect you and whether you do allow them to affect you in the core of who you are. Some of the Stoics call this the ruling part, the hegemonikon in Greek. Some, like Epictetus, will talk in terms of proiresis, the faculty of choice, also translated in a variety of other ways, like choice or moral character, various other things. But the idea is that you use that part of yourself to decide how that part of yourself is going to be affected. So if you're going to let yourself get bent out of shape, as Seneca points out, every time that somebody does something bad, boy, are you going to be an upset person, right? And it doesn't mean, by the way, that people can't affect us in all sorts of externals, from our bodies to our social status to our money and income and wealth, our relationships. Somebody can spread gossip about us and a friendship winds up being destroyed in the process. All of that is true. We are vulnerable to those sorts of things. It's just that those, from the Stoic perspective, don't have the kind of value that being a virtuous or vicious person does. We're not impervious, and we shouldn't pretend that we are, because we're not fully developed. We're not sages. But we can say this, and I'll close with this. When we see somebody behaving badly, that provides us, whether it's affecting us directly or not, with an opportunity for reflection and for thinking about our own choices and behavior. and thereby for growth and development along the path that the Stoics sketch out. So as Epictetus will tell us in an entire chapter, everything that we encounter can actually be turned to good for ourselves, and that includes the bad behavior that we observe on the part of other people.